In Lesson 1, we learned that Jude is a letter to a church urging them to fight for the true faith. Fight against false teachers who had secretly slipped in among them. After accusing these men of denying Jesus, not so much by what they believe, but by how they live, their sinful actions show that they deny Jesus, regardless of their words. They can call it God's grace, but the truth is, it's just a license to break every law. So they're denying Jesus with their deeds. Then Jude uses 3 examples to show the seriousness of what these men in their church are doing. Now I want to remind you, although you came to know these things once and for all, that Jesus saved a people out of Egypt and later destroyed those who did not believe. So example number 1 is the Israelites that God rescued from Egypt. Think about this. They had just seen with their own eyes the 10 plagues and the parting of the Red Sea, and they saw God himself descend from heaven and land on Mount Sinai. And some of them still did not trust him. So God sent judgment. Now, why is Jude reminding the church of this Old Testament story? Because it's a perfect parallel for the situation in their church. In both cases, you've got one group of people who all say they believe in God and worship him. But there were some among them who did not believe, and their actions revealed it. In the Old Testament story, they wanted to go back to Egypt. In Jude, they wanted to live with no restraint on their desires, particularly regarding sex and money. So what point is Jude making to the church? Just because you're in the group of God's people doesn't mean you're actually one of them. And judgment is coming, just like it did for the Israelites back in the Old Testament. There could be secondary applications, depending on which Old Testament passage Jude is alluding to, such as they need to be careful who to follow. Moses and Aaron were 2 leaders of the people, but Aaron made a golden calf and let them get out of control, partying, sexual revelry, with no restraint. So there was 2 leaders in the group, and if you listen to the wrong one, Aaron, he'll lead you astray, and it resulted in the death of thousands. So the people in Jude's church need to be careful who they listen to. Now, the second Old Testament example to show the seriousness of the situation. And the angels who did not keep their own position, but abandoned their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains, in deep darkness, for the judgment on the great day. So this could be referring to the fall of some angels due to pride or refusal to submit. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Or it could refer to Genesis 6, where fallen angels supposedly have sex with human women and are punished. That was a popular interpretation of Genesis 6 at that time. So Jude could refer to that without necessarily supporting that interpretation of Genesis 6, the way a pastor today might refer to Robin Hood to make his point. But either way, Jude uses these fallen angels to make his point. The third and last example to show the seriousness of these evil guys in the church. Likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns committed sexual immorality and perversions and serve as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So these 3 examples have some things in common. Judgment. The false teachers were saying, God's gracious, we won't be judged, but Jude using biblical examples to say, you will be judged. Factions in the group. In other words, just because you're wearing the uniform doesn't mean you're actually on God's team. So remember this picture from last week. Here's the church. Some people in the church are false believers, false teachers. And finally, one of the things that these 3 examples have in common is being unrestrained by the boundaries set by God, particularly regarding sex. Nobody can have anybody else's spouse. Everybody stays in their own domain. No angels with women, no men with men, no sex outside of marriage. Basically, just follow God's rules. Verse 8. In the same way, these people, relying on their dreams, defile their flesh, reject authority. Think about that phrase, relying on their dreams. This means that they are also false prophets, claiming personal revelation. I'm not saying God can't reveal things to people through dreams, but these guys, their dreams are either made up or not from God. I mean, a dream is like the one thing you can tell a story about and no one can ever fact check. No one can ever call you on it. Like, I thought you said you were in a boat with your brother. Yeah, but as I looked at him, I realized it wasn't my brother, it was actually Hillary Clinton. You know how dreams are. But seriously, how do we know these dreams are not from God? Well, they have both of the main red flags that say false prophet. They contradict the Bible, and God does not contradict himself. And these guys live wicked lives, which is the other biggest sign of false doctrine. Today's lesson is covering the body of the letter. And it's all one big warning to say, stay away from these guys. Next week, we'll finish up Jude and we'll cover the closing section, which talks about how to handle the people who were deceived by the false teachers. Because their sins corrupted other people. And this is why this next set of warnings is so fitting. It's 3 more Old Testament examples, but this time it's people who sinned and led others into sin. Woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain, have plunged into Balaam's error for profit, and have perished in Korah's rebellion. Cain killed his brother, but then he built a city which was dominated by pride and violence. Balaam obviously led Israel into sin, and Korah did too by leading a rebellion against Moses. So just like these 3 examples, these false teachers in Jude's church are leading others into sin and into all the destructive repercussions that sin naturally brings. And maybe, like Korah, these guys might be leading people into divine judgment and wrath. The next point Jude makes is that these teachers and those corrupted by them might look like the rest of the church. To make this point, he compares the false teachers to a bunch of things in nature which appear to be something that they're not. These people are dangerous reefs at your love feasts, as they eat with you without reverence. They are shepherds who only look after themselves. They are waterless clouds carried along by winds, trees in late autumn, fruitless, twice dead and uprooted. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shameful deeds, wandering stars, for whom the blackest of darkness is reserved forever. Reefs are hidden just below the surface of the sea. It may look like clear sailing, but if you sail over a reef, it'll wreck your ship. And shepherds may appear to be people who take care of sheep, but these false teachers only take care of themselves. Clouds may look like they're going to bring rain, and you would assume that by late autumn there'd be fruit on the tree, but these guys bear no fruit at all. And the wandering stars. At first glance, Mercury might look like a star, but if you watch it night after night, you'll see that it doesn't follow the same pattern as all the other stars. So just because they're part of the church doesn't mean that they're truly saved. You've got to listen to what they're saying and watch how they live. Really, this should be no surprise that there are false teachers in the church. The Old Testament is full of examples of false prophets, and even the New Testament apostles warned about it. But you, dear friends, remember what was predicted by the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ. They told you, In the end time, there will be scoffers living according to their own ungodly desires. These people create divisions and are worldly, not having the Spirit. Worldly. When I was a kid, my mental image of a worldly person had a bunch of piercings and tattoos, and they smoked. But worldly can really be simple things, like overvaluing money and personal pleasure. So worldliness is not as easy to spot as you might think, and we have a lot of worldly influences around us that seep into our thinking. Jesus said that money can deceive us. Remember, a deceived person doesn't know they're being deceived until it's too late. So, ask God to search your heart. Ask Him to expose any worldly thinking you may have been believing. And ask Him to fill your thoughts with spiritual things and godly desires and a hunger for righteousness. There could be secondary applications. There could be secondary applications depending on There could be secondary applications depending on which. There could be secondary applications. People who